what we're doing with our diet is eating all the muscle meat
Right.
and throwing away all the glycine through getting rid of all the rest of the animal. So to me, the problem is very clear. It makes sense. And taking either a glycine supplement or reintroducing these foods, it's to me a no-brainer. It's just all adding up first principles in such a profound way.
Right. And it's even, I mentioned the number of ways that you get sort of a double whammy from eating the muscle meat and throwing away the bones. Eating too much, getting fat, making less glycine internally. That's a third way. A fourth way is that as we have progressed in our agricultural technology, animal husbandry technology, we're eating meats, they're all fed on the feedlots. They're fed corn and soybeans and everything like that, and they get this wonderful, well-marbled meat. Well, muscle meat should be marbled with collagen, not so much with fat. And that makes it less tender, but it also makes the muscle meat less glycine poor. So even if you didn't do anything else except just eat the muscle meat, it's not as good as the muscle meat used to be in terms of glycine content or amino acid content than it used to be. So in every way, kind of every element of modernity in terms of diet has worked against health because it's worked toward lowering the naturally high levels of glycine that we should have with a really healthy diet. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, it would be suspicious. That's another kind of piece of the puzzle, is to say, yeah, but if nature really intended us to eat this much of that nutrient, why all of a sudden, are we discovering it now? And it makes perfect sense, of course.
Okay, so to go over the M1, M2 again.
Right.
We know with blunt trauma, the M2 is not going over to M1 with the macrophages. We talked about the fact that it still does happen with glycine with infection.
Right.
How different is that response in the latter with glycine, if at all?
Presumably, it would be, of shorter duration. I mean, as much as it takes to clear the infection. I'm just trying to think now in cases of infection, where has it, well, certainly glycine has been shown certainly in animal work, and I don't even know if they've done it with people, but it's very well established with animal work. This was actually in the 1990s with the Thurman group, that it prevents toxic shock. So that's certainly a case where infection, where the reaction is overly active. And by preventing that, you actually save the life. Now, so as I say, this has been done in animal research a lot. And unfortunately, I don't know that it has been tried. I haven't seen it in the literature that anyone has tried glycine therapy for, toxic shock. And yet, it's kind of a no-brainer, you would think, for something so simple and safe and natural to try it, because it's worked so well in animals. So I would say the reaction must be different. It's certainly adequate. If you have enough glycine, it's adequate, because there's nothing that shows that glycine, that people who take glycine have more or more enduring infections. I've just never heard of that. So, I mean, if it had a materially different reaction at the cellular level that was actually relevant, then I would think we would see it at the whole body level, right? So I don't know. I'm certainly not aware of it.
Okay, so just to be clear, you've never seen a case or cases where taking glycine has prolonged an infection and tamed that down in a way where the body actually can't heal normally?
No, I've seen it help. I mean, again, first of all, I'm not a clinician. So I give dietary advice. I don't give medical advice. But what I have during the pandemic, I had a friend who his dad got COVID. The whole family got COVID, but his dad got really sick, and they took him to the hospitalists in Poughkeepsie, New York. And they put him on a ventilator, and he wasn't really getting any better. And they were just going to, not treat him with anything. And he pleaded with them, oh, please, 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 please. He was like 12 days on the ventilator. And finally, they were able to stabilize his condition. They probably gave him some prednisone. That's finally what, later in the pandemic, they realized it's all about inflammation. Let's give him an anti-inflammatory steroid. And that's the standard treatment, I believe, now for COVID pneumonia. And so they gave him that, and he was very, very weak. So they said, well, nothing we can do except send him home. So they sent him home. And my friend, his son, called me up, and because I told him about Sweetamine, my product, and he said, well, what will your stuff help him? What can you do to help him? Because they discharged him from the hospital, and here he is. He literally cannot get out of bed. He has no strength at all. He cannot get out of bed. So I said, well, make some tea and put some of my Sweetamine in it. And I dropped the box off late at night, and my wife said, don't go in the house. This was the pandemic days. Don't go in the house, and you don't want to catch COVID. I hadn't had it at that point yet. And neither did she. And so it was like, we left him a few boxes of Sweetamine at the doorstep, and he called me a few days later, and he said, it was like a miracle. He says, you came like an angel in the night. He said, I put it in his tea. I put a packet in his tea. And the next morning he got up and went about his business. And so I think that in terms of long COVID, and I had other friends also who were, taking Sweetamine. And when the pandemic hit, even though they caught it, it was not, it didn't get to their lungs. In fact, I had one friend who was in her late 60s. She was 67 at the time, a contemporary of mine. I'm 75 now, so she's a little younger. But she had less than a year before, she had like air pockets in her lungs. She had lung surgery the prior year. And now she got COVID, and she was fine. I got COVID, and it was a really nasty intestinal flu, it felt like. I mean, the thing happened with the taste and the smell and all of that kind of stuff and the malaise. So I had a moderate case. I wasn't bedridden, but I really felt like crap. And, I needed to sleep 12 hours a day and stuff like that. But it was not, no coughs, no sneezes, no wheezes. It did not trigger my alveolar macrophages at all, because presumably there was enough glycine there with taking, 8 grams a day that I have in my product. You get 10 because you get a couple from the diet anyway. But anyway, thereabouts, I had enough glycine in my system that it was not even in any respect a respiratory infection, except that I may have got it that way, but it didn't produce any respiratory symptoms whatsoever. I got the fever, I got the diarrhea, I got the can't smell anything for a couple of weeks, and the taste was messed up. All the usual classic signs, and of course the positive test at the blood lab, but nothing in the way of a respiratory infection. Just wasn't.
COVID aside, any other stories of people taking glycine and dramatic changes that stand out to you with chronic health conditions?
No, not really. I had a friend who had chronic recurring Lyme disease, for example, and he was taking it, but he would still have these flare-ups and so on. So I'm not sure that it really made any difference. It certainly didn't hurt. I have another friend who has gout, and it would make the gout flare-ups much, much milder, but that's not infectious. But in terms of any kind of immune condition like a hypersensitivity or autoimmunity, so I did another little self-experiment with poison ivy. I was very acutely sensitive to poison ivy. You take a leaf of poison ivy and you just barely let it touch my skin, and it would, in a couple of days, you'd see all those bumps, and it would itch like crazy and look ugly and so forth and spread and whatnot. And so I thought, okay, it seems to me that since I've been taking glycine, I'm not so sensitive to poison ivy anymore. So usually get a few sprigs in the yard, that I have to clean up every year, that I do, sort of surgically with rubber gloves and stuff, plastic gloves. So I took a sprig of poison ivy with a plastic glove, and I took the back of my left hand and I, rubbed it on my hand just like that a few times. Make sure I got plenty of poison ivy there, disposed of it and so forth. I didn't do any kind of, solvent cleanup or anything. I just did normal hand washing and everything like that. Sure enough, a couple of days later, I got the usual, horrible, ugly looking bumps and whatever. And it itched when it first came out a little bit, but then it just stopped itching, and it lasted as long as it usually lasts. The bumps, didn't subside for several days, but it stopped itching. And so I had no problem with it. In terms of infectious disease, I had another dramatic result in that in 2015, I got shingles. So I was, 64 years old, had chicken pox as a kid. Okay, I got shingles. Classic, because I have a friend who's a neurologist. I went to see him, and I said, I think I got shingles. And he said, yep, classic. Your diagnosis is correct. You've got shingles. And the way I found out about it is I got up in the morning and I went through my morning routine, and I was just in the shower, and I was soaping up in the shower, and I felt with my fingertips of my right hand, I felt these bumps on my lower back on the right side. And so I looked, in the mirror behind me and so on. And so sure enough, there was like a textbook case of shingles, unilateral, characteristic rash, lower back. Except for one thing, the rash was absolutely painless. This is a rash that's often described as excruciating. People get vaccines for it. I would never get a vaccine for something like that. That was really a minor nuisance. I had it. It lasted most of the summer, and it, I had a little bit of malaise going along with it, but it was, it didn't hurt. And they say your skin is on fire and stuff like that, and it didn't hurt. And I had a testimonial recently from a fellow who had shingles. He had radiation treatments for prostate cancer a few years prior, and so presumably that may have sensitized him to it or whatever, but he got a case of shingles, and he said it produced such excruciating pain in his hip, right, because that's down in that area near where the prostate, I guess the same nerves down there. So he said he got, the pain was excruciating, and absolutely nothing helped till he tried Sweetamine, because he had bought it from me some years before, heard about it on the radio. And he said that worked. That actually made the pain mostly subside. So it was just a matter of the glycine. So now, does that generally hold true with itches? I say no. If you ask me what my most annoying health problem is in my later years, in my 70s, has been for the last several years, it's this when the air is dry, my skin itches. And I've got to put, a lotion on it that has some Promoxin in it, a local anesthetic in it. So it's not itch per se, but it's whatever is that secondary, probably inflammatory reaction, whether it's shingles or whether it's gout or whether it's a poison ivy allergy or something that gives you an allergic immune kind of reaction type itch. It helps that. But regular dry skin itch doesn't work. I can tell you that. So anyway, that's the story there. So I think that answers your question. That's kind of the sum total of my experience that I can think of along those lines.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
Contrary to what it says in any source you look at, that inflammation is the immune system's first response to infection or injury, it is really only a first response to infection. Inflammation does the body no good.